Portlock, originally called Port Chatham, sits on the southern coast of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, facing the Gulf of Alaska. In the early 20th century, it was a small but functioning settlement composed mainly of Alutiiq, Sugpiaq, native families, along with a handful of European-American fishermen. By the 1920s and 1930s, Portlock supported a cannery fishing boats and seasonal workers, families who relied on hunting, trapping, and fishing. It was remote, but not isolated by Alaskan standards. Residents traveled regularly by boat to nearby communities. Yet even in this relatively normal setting, fear began to grow. Between the late 1920s and the early 1940s, residents began reporting a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Known accounts include a fisherman found dead on the beach, reportedly torn apart, a man killed while gathering firewood, his body later discovered with severe injuries, multiple hunters who failed to return, never found, despite searches. One of the most cited deaths involved Joe Clark, a local resident who was allegedly attacked while hunting. His body was later found, badly mutilated. While details vary between accounts, the consensus among witnesses was that the injuries were not consistent with bear attacks, which locals were very familiar with. Another man reportedly vanished while checking traps inland. His remains were never recovered. These events were not isolated. Residents claimed fear grew with each passing season. The Alutiiq people of the region had long oral traditions, warning of dangerous beings in the wilderness. One term later popularized was Nantinak, sometimes incorrectly called Alaskan Bigfoot, described as large, extremely strong, violent toward humans, dwelling in remote forests and mountains. Importantly, elders did not describe Nantinak as mythical or symbolic. It was treated as a real, physical threat to be avoided. As deaths mounted, many residents became convinced that something unknown, not human, not animal, was responsible. People began traveling in groups. Children were forbidden from wandering. Hunting trips were shortened or canceled entirely. By the late 1930s, territorial authorities were aware that Portlock was experiencing serious trouble. But law enforcement presence was minimal. No permanent police force existed in the village. Investigations were sporadic, delayed by weather, distance, and limited resources. Records suggest some deaths were attributed to bear attacks, though residents strongly disputed this. Others were labeled accidents, or unexplained no arrests were ever made. There is no evidence of a formal massacre investigation by U.S. authorities at the time. This lack of response contributed heavily to fear and rumor. By the early 1940s, daily life in Portlock had changed dramatically. People avoided the woods entirely. Fishing and trapping declined. Night travel stopped almost completely. Families slept armed. Several residents later stated they heard heavy footsteps, whistling, or movement outside cabins at night. Whether these sounds were real, imagined, or misinterpreted wildlife, the psychological toll was devastating. As one elder later said, "It didn't matter what it was. We knew it could kill us." Between 1947 and 1950, Portlock was gradually abandoned. Families relocated to safer communities such as Nanwalek and Port Graham. Homes were left standing. Boats were removed. The cannery closed. Importantly, there was no single evacuation order, no mass grave, no final recorded attack. The village simply emptied. By the early 1950s, Portlock was officially considered abandoned. The term Portlock Massacre is modern, not historical. There is no evidence of a single mass killing event. Instead, historians describe a pattern of violent deaths and disappearances, occurring over many years, leading to total abandonment due to fear. This distinction matters. What happened at Portlock was not a sudden slaughter, but something arguably more disturbing: a slow erosion of safety, trust, and survival. A. Wildlife explanation. Some researchers argue that unusually aggressive bears or a series of animal attacks caused the deaths. However, bears rarely mutilate bodies in the way described locals were experienced in identifying bear kills. Multiple incidents occurred without tracks or signs. B. Human violence. Others suggest human perpetrators, possibly transient workers or criminals. Yet, no suspects were ever identified. Violence continued despite isolation. Disappearances occurred deep in wilderness areas. C. Cultural memory of a real threat. Many Alutiiq elders maintain that Nantinak was real, not metaphorical, something physical that had always existed in the region and occasionally preyed on humans. This belief remains strong today. Portlock remains abandoned. Visitors report an overwhelming sense of isolation, ruins reclaimed by forest wildlife, avoiding certain areas. While such reports are subjective, the site remains untouched out of respect for those who fled it. No one has resettled Portlock.